The pain was a living thing, a hot coal lodged beneath his collarbone. Cole Harlow kept his teeth clenched, his right arm strapped tight against his ribs. But the festering heat of the wound radiated with every jostle of the wagon. It had been 4 days since the skirmish with the rustlers up on the high ridge. 4 days of pretending the bullet had only grazed him. 4 days of swallowing whiskey and bile while the infection set in, painting his skin a bruised, angry purple that crept toward his heart. He'd lost 3 heads of cattle and taken a bullet for his trouble, and now he was losing a fight with his own foreman. "You're a damn fool, Cole." Gus Riley didn't look up from the reins, his voice as flat and worn as the landscape. "Another day of your stubbornness, and I'll be taking you to the undertaker, not the doctor." "I've had worse." Cole lied. The sweat on his brow was cold. "No, you ain't." Gus snapped the reins, pushing the horses harder. "You're burning up. And if you die, your pa's legacy rots with you. All those years building the heart ache, just for you to get killed by pure, uncut pride. She won't have it." Cole didn't answer. He slumped against the wagon seat, the motion sending a fresh bolt of agony through his shoulder. He hated this. Hated being weak. Hated being handled. And most of all, hated being dragged into Larkspur Bend like a sack of sick grain. He was Cole Harlow, the man who'd clawed this land from granite and grief, the cattle baron whose name meant something in the Wyoming territory. Now he was just a man with a fever, shrinking under the vast, indifferent sky. The land itself offered no comfort. This was not a place for weakness. The territory stretched out in every direction, an endless, rolling ocean of scorched sagebrush and pale, dry grass. The wind never stopped. It was a high, thin scream that scoured the plains, carrying the grit of the earth into a man's teeth, his eyes, his very soul. It peeled the paint from the few buildings that dared to stand, and it pushed the dust into great, suffocating clouds that hazed the horizon. Far to the west, the mountains were a jagged purple promise of the winter to come. It was late October, 1887, and the land was holding its breath, waiting for the first snows to bury its mistakes. Larkspur Bend was just a collection of mistakes huddled by a creek that threatened to run dry every August. Gus pulled the team to a halt on the town's main street, a wide ribbon of ankle-deep dust. "This is it." Cole cracked an eye open. This was a small, clapboard building that looked more like a poorly planned shed than a place of healing. The paint that remained was a hopeful, peeling white. A simple wooden sign hung over the door, creaking on its hinges. The black lettering stark: C. Layton, M.D., physician-surgeon. "C. Layton," Cole muttered, his tongue thick. "Old Doc Ephraim finally kicked it?" "Month ago," Gus said, climbing down. "Fever. This new one bought his supplies. Folks say he's good. I came from St. Louis." "He?" Cole grunted, letting Gus hook a strong arm under his good one. The world tilted as he was hauled to his feet. He leaned on his foreman. Each step on the warped boardwalk a fresh torment. The smell of the street, dust, horse, stale beer from the saloon 2 doors down, clogged his throat. Gus pushed the clinic door open. A small bell tinkled, a sound too delicate for this town. The waiting room was small but obsessively clean. A cast-iron stove in the corner provided a dry, stifling heat. 3 wooden chairs sat against one wall, empty. The air smelled sharp, not of dust, but of carbolic and something herbal, something clean. A door at the back of the room opened. "I'll be with you in a moment. Please, have a seat." The voice was not a he. It was low, clear, and educated. It was a voice he had not heard in 10 years, a voice that had haunted his sleep and his waking hours, a voice that belonged to a ghost. Cole's head snapped up, the pain in his shoulder momentarily eclipsed by a violent, impossible shock that stopped his heart. She stood in the doorway, drying her hands on a white apron. She was thinner than he remembered, the girlish softness of her face carved down to something stronger, sharper. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was pinned up in a severe bun, but stray strands softened the line of her jaw. She was dressed in a simple, practical dark skirt and a white shirtwaist. But it was her, the eyes, the same impossible shade of green, the color of the deep woods after a rain. Clara Layton. Her gaze met his. For a fraction of a second, the world stopped. He saw the recognition flash. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale as bleached bone. Her hands, holding the towel, froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Gus, oblivious, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, my boss, Mr. Harlow, he's taken a bullet. It's gone bad." The name Harlow seemed to strike her like a slap. The shock vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, brittle glass. Her eyes became flat, professional, and utterly empty. She looked past Cole, addressing Gus. "Bring him in. Lay him on the examination table. And please, wait outside. I'll need to be quiet." "Yes, ma'am." Gus helped Cole hobble into the back room, a small, bright space lined with shelves of glass bottles. Cole collapsed onto the narrow table, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the fever and the shock warring for control. Gus gave him a worried look. "You'll be all right, boss." "Get out, Gus." Gus nodded and shut the door, leaving Cole alone with the woman he'd thought he would never see again. Clara moved around the room with a crisp, efficient energy. She did not look at his face. She washed her hands again, in a basin, the sound of the water and the harsh soap scraping the silence. "Which shoulder?" she asked. Her voice was nice. "Left," he rasped. "Sit up. Take off your shirt." He fumbled with the buttons of his good arm, but his fingers were clumsy, shaking. The pain made him clumsy, but it was her presence that undid him. With a sound of pure exasperation, she stepped forward. "Let me—" Her fingers were at his chest, working the buttons. He could feel the slight tremor in them, the only sign of her agitation. He was drowning in the scent of her, that clean carbolic smell mixed with the faint, phantom memory of wild roses. The soap she used to use. She pulled the sweat-drenched fabric away from his skin, her touch impersonal, clinical. When the shirt was off, she drew in a sharp, professional breath. "Dear God, how long have you let this go?" She turned her back to him, moving to a small cabinet. He watched her, his mind reeling. Clara, a doctor. Here, in Larkspur Bend, the town that had taken everything from her. "It's just a graze," he said, the words sounding stupid even to him. "It is not just a graze," she snapped, returning with a metal tray of instruments. "It's a festering wound, deeply infected, and you have a fever of at least 102. You are Mr. Harlow. A very fortunate man not to be dead of blood poisoning. This is going to hurt." She didn't wait for a reply. She dipped a cloth in a bowl of steaming water and carbolic and pressed it to the wound. The pain was white-hot. "Electric," Cole hissed, his body arching off the table. But he refused to cry out. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice devoid of pity. She worked quickly, her touch firm, unforgiving. She cleaned the wound, her movements precise. He watched her face, the set of her jaw, the concentration in her eyes. This was not the girl he knew. The girl he knew had laughed with her whole body and argued theology with her preacher father and kissed him by the creek with a fierce, trembling passion that had set his young world on fire. He remembered a day. It must have been 11 years ago, late summer. They were hidden in the tall grasses down by the water, the air thick with cottonwood fluff. He had just been made junior foreman at the Hard H, full of 20-year-old pride. She had stolen a book of poetry from her father's study. "It's sinful," she'd whispered, her green eyes dancing. "What is?" he'd asked, his hand already finding hers. "Wanting this, I want you. Knowing I should be back there, helping with the church supper. Then let's be sinful." "Clara." He'd kissed her. It had tasted like sunlight and dust and the sweet, tart, wild berries she'd been eating. Her hand had come up to cup his jaw, her skin so soft against his rough stubble. He had felt, in that moment, entirely whole, as if this small, fierce, intelligent woman held the key to every locked room inside him. "This is infected down to the muscle," the cold voice of the woman in front of him stated, pulling him from the memory. She picked up a scalpel. The metal glinted. "I have to open it, to drain it. I have no laudanum strong enough for this. And you're too feverish for chloroform. You will have to endure it. Get on with it," he ground out. He stared at the ceiling, at a water stain that looked like a map of Texas. He heard her take a breath. "Hold him," she said. Cole realized Gus had re-entered, his face pale. "Hold his good shoulder. Firmly." Gus put a heavy hand on Cole's right shoulder, pressing him down. "Sorry, boss." Cole barely heard him. He was looking at Clara. Her face was pale, set. She looked at the wound, not at him. And then she cut. It was not a clean pain. It was a searing, sickening rip. A raw scream tore from his throat, a sound he hadn't made since he was a boy. His vision went white, then red. He thrashed, but Gus held him fast. "Almost done," Clara said, her voice strained. He could feel the pressure as she worked, the agonizing exploration of the blade, the rush of infected blood. He was falling, tumbling back in time again. But this time it was not sunlight and kisses. It was night, torches, the smell of whiskey and rage and hot tar. A mob of 20 men, men he knew, men he drank with at the saloon, dragging Thomas Layton from the smithy. Clara's brother, a good man, quiet, who knew horses better than anyone. He'd been accused of stealing a saddle and $2 silver from the land office. A lie, but a convenient one. Cole had been there. He'd just ridden into town. He saw it all. He saw Clara, her face stark white in the torchlight, screaming at the men. She saw him, sitting on his horse, just watching. "Cole!" she shrieked. Her voice cut through the roar of the mob. "Cole, stop them! Tell them! You know he didn't do it! Do something!" He was 21. He was the junior foreman, desperate for the approval of his father, of the town, of the powerful men in that mob. He saw the new sheriff, Old Man Hemlock, just watching with a smile. To speak against them was to lose everything he'd been working for. He was a coward. He'd looked away from her. He'd turned his horse, just slightly. It was all the answer she needed. The betrayal in that one small movement was absolute. He heard her scream again, a sound of pure, animal grief, as they threw the rope over the branch of the hanging tree. He had ridden out of town, the sound of that rope creaking, the cheers of the men, and her single, broken sob chasing him all the way back to the ranch. She was gone by morning. She and her father vanished, and he had never, in 10 years, slept a single night without hearing that scream. "It's done." He blinked, his body slick with sweat, the clinic room swimming back into focus. The raw, burning agony in his shoulder had subsided to a deep, throbbing ache. He felt weak, empty. Clara was wrapping a clean white bandage around his shoulder. Her hands were steady now, but her knuckles were white. "The infection is drained," she said, her voice flat, tired. "But the fever will hold for another day or two. You'll need to soak this in hot salt water twice a day. And this," she moved to her desk and wrote on a small piece of paper. "These are quinine powders. Take one every 4 hours with water. It will help with the fever. Gus can get them from the mercantile." She handed the paper not to him, but to Gus. Cole slowly, painfully, pushed himself into a sitting position. The room spun. He looked at her. She was finally looking at him, and her eyes were not empty anymore. They were full of 10 years of rage and grief and a chilling, profound hatred. "Clara," he whispered, the name feeling like gravel in his mouth. Her face hardened. "Do not call me that. You have no right. I didn't know you were back." "Why would you?" she said, her voice low and shaking with controlled fury. "You rode away. You have your ranch, your cattle. Larkspur Bend is your town. I am just a doctor. I'm not—" "Get your shirt," she interrupted, turning away to wash the instruments, her back a rigid wall. "Gus can help you with it. He slid off the table, his legs unsteady. The spark was still there. He could feel it, even through the hate. It was a miserable, desperate thing, buried under a decade of ash. But it was there. It was in the way she wouldn't look at him, in the tremor he'd felt in her hand, in the violent shared memory that now hung in the air between them, thick as smoke. Gus helped him pull the shirt over his good arm, leaving the wounded side bare. Cole stood there for a moment, a powerful, wealthy man, reduced to a trembling, feverish patient in the presence of the only woman he had ever truly broken. "The fee is $2, she said, still not turning around. Cole fumbled in his pocket, but Gus was faster, placing $2 silver on the desk. "Come on, boss." Cole let Gus steer him toward the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her stiff, unforgiving posture. He wanted to say something. "I'm sorry. I was a fool. I never stopped loving you." But the words were useless. They were 10 years too late. "You'll need to come back in 2 days, she said, her voice muffled, "so I can check the packaging. If the fever breaks. If not, come back tomorrow." "I'll bring him," Gus said. Cole said nothing. He walked out of the clinic, the little bell tinkling his departure. The Wyoming wind hit him, cold and sharp, but it couldn't touch the chill inside him. The Hard H ranch house was silent. Cole sat in his study, a massive room built of dark wood and leather, a monument to his father's success and his own relentless ambition. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the desk. He hadn't bothered with the lamp. The setting sun cast long, orange shadows across the floor. He couldn't stop seeing her. Her face, the way her hands, so small and capable, had held the scalpel, the way she had looked at him, as if he were something she'd scraped off her boot. Gus had told him the story on the ride back. After Doc Ephraim died, the town council had been desperate. Her application had arrived from St. Louis. C. Layton. M.A.D. They'd assumed it was a man. When she arrived on the stagecoach 2 weeks ago, a woman. And not just any woman, but Preacher Layton's daughter, the one whose brother had been hanged. The town had nearly exploded. Old Man Hemlock's son, the new sheriff, had tried to run her off. But she'd stayed. She'd presented her credentials, a medical degree from a women's college in Missouri, surgical experience from a battlefield clinic back east. She had faced them all down, proud and cold as a statue, and had simply opened her doors. Cole picked up the glass, the whiskey burning his throat. A doctor. She had made something of herself. While he had been building an empire of cattle and land, she had been building a life, a purpose, and she had come back. She had come back to the place that had murdered her brother and broken her heart. He thought of his own brother, dead 5 years now. His neck snapped in a drunken fall from a horse. He thought of his father's suffocating disappointment, the burden of the legacy he now carried alone. He was rich, he was powerful, and he was utterly, miserably alone. He looked at his bandaged shoulder. He could still feel her touch, precise and cold. He could still smell the carbolic. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was not over. Miles away, in Larkspur Bend, the sun had set, plunging the street into a deep, cold purple. Clara Layton locked the clinic door. She was exhausted, her entire body aching with a tension that was almost as painful as Cole's wound must have been. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door, her eyes closed. Cole Harlow. After 10 years, he looked older, harder. The lanky, ambitious boy was gone, replaced by a powerful man, with lines of grief and command etched around his eyes, and still, God help her, the same mouth, the same dark, brooding eyes. She'd spent 10 years trying to burn that face from her memory. 10 years of study, of stitching up shattered men in bloody hospital tents, of losing her father to a fever in a damp St. Louis tenement. She had fought her way back here, not for revenge, but to claim the only home she had ever known, to prove that she was more than the girl who had fled in shame. She was Dr. Layton. She was a physician. She belonged, but the town didn't see it that way. Not all of them. A light knock came on the door. She sighed, straightening up, smoothing her apron. She unbolted the lock. It was Mrs. Gable, holding her 7-year-old daughter, Annie, who was coughing, a dry, barking sound. "Dr. Layton, I'm so sorry to bother you after hours." "Mrs." Gable whispered, her eyes darting nervously up and down the dark street. "But her cough, it's so tight." "Bring her in," Clara said, her voice softening instantly. She led the girl to the stove, stoking the fire. "Let's have a listen," as she placed her stethoscope on the child's small back, listening to the congested rattle in her lungs. "Mrs." Gable fidgeted. "I heard," the woman began, her voice low. "Heard what, Mrs.?" "Gable? That you had a visitor this afternoon. Cole Harlow himself." Clara kept her focus on the child. "He is a patient, like any other." Of course, Mrs." Gable said quickly. "It's just, well, people are talking. You and him. After all that happened with your poor brother. It's just not decent. Is it? A woman, alone, treating a man like that." Clara finished her examination and stood up. She met Mrs. Gable's gaze, her own eyes steady. "Annie has a chest cold. Keep her warm. Boil a kettle in her room for the steam. I'll give you a syrup for the cough." She moved to her cabinet, pouring a dark liquid into a small bottle. "As for my patients, Mrs. Gable, their decency, or mine, is not part of the diagnosis. My fee is 25 cents. Mrs. Gable flushed, taking the bottle and pressing the coins into Clara's hand. "Thank you, Doctor." She hurried her daughter out the door, as if escaping. Clara locked the door again. She walked back to the examination room, to the table where he had lain. She could still smell him, the faint, masculine scent of sweat, leather, and whiskey, a scent that had once been her only comfort. She saw the rag she had used to clean his wound, stained dark with his blood. She picked it up, her hand shaking, and for a moment she wanted to throw it into the stove, to burn away the last 10 years, to burn away the man who had sat on his horse and watched her world end. Instead, she dropped it into the bucket for boiling. She was a doctor. She was professional. But as she stood alone in the dark, the wind howling outside, she was also the girl by the hanging tree, and she was haunted. The fever had broken. But Cole Harlow found it left a different kind of ailment in its wake. A hollowness, a persistent, nagging itch that had nothing to do with his healing shoulder. His body was mending, the flesh knitting back together under Clara's precise care. But his mind had been torn wide open. He rode into Larkspur Bend 2 days after his first visit, as instructed. He told himself it was for the dressing change. He told Gus he could manage it alone. The town seemed quieter this time. Or perhaps he was just more attuned to the silence. He tied his horse outside the clinic, the white, peeling paint of the building looking stark in the flat morning light. He was not her only patient. The small waiting room held Mrs. Gable, this time without her daughter, and 2 older ranchers, Silas Croft and Jedediah Marsh, who were whispering behind their hands until Cole walked in. They fell silent, their eyes following him as he took a seat, his hat in his lap. Mrs. Gable gave him a look of profound, almost fearful disapproval, then turned her gaze to the floor. The air was thick with things unsaid. The inner door opened. "Mr. Croft, you may come in." Clara's voice was crisp, businesslike. Cole waited. He listened to the murmur of her voice from the examination room, the occasional grunt from Silas. He studied the clean, worn floorboards, the way the light caught the dust motes dancing in the air. He was a man accustomed to authority, to giving orders and having them obeyed. Here, he was just a name on a list, waiting. It was unsettling. After what felt like an hour, Silas emerged, looking sheepish. "Thank you kindly, Dr. Mr. Harlow." She called his name without emerging, a summons from an unseen authority. He stood, the sudden movement of the other occupant's eyes feeling like a physical touch. He stepped into the back room. She was there, washing her hands in the basin, her back to him. "On the table, please," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the small, clean space. Shirt off. He did as he was told, the silence stretching. He could feel her anger, or whatever it was, rolling off her in cold waves. It was so different from the vibrant, warm energy he remembered. "The wound is closing well," she observed, her fingers probing the edges of the bandage, her touch light but impersonal. "The fever is gone." "Yes," he cleared his throat. It feels better. You have a good hand. Clara." Her hand stilled for a non-existent second. "It is my job, Mr. Harlow. As I'm sure you manage your cattle with an expert hand." She began to unwrap the gauze, her movements economical, swift. "Clara, I need to... Please hold still. I need to say. Are you sorry?" She finished unwrapping the bandage and dropped it into a waste bin, her back to him as she prepared a new one. "I am sure you are. It is a terrible inconvenience. Getting shot. You will have to be more careful." Her words were sharp, deliberately misunderstanding him. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid line of her spine. "That's not what I mean," he said, his voice low. "I mean about Thomas. About that night. I was a coward." She turned, and for the first time, the professional mask slipped. He saw the girl from 10 years ago, her face pale, her eyes blazing with a grief so profound it struck him dumb. "A coward," she repeated, her voice a low, shaking whisper. "You were a boy who watched, a boy who weighed his reputation against my brother's life and found my brother lacking. You are a man now, Mr. Harlow, a powerful one. I hope the price was worth it." "It wasn't, but you paid for it, and you have your ranch, and I..." She gestured around the small, sterile room. "Have this." She dipped a cloth in carbolic, the sharp scent filling the air, and began to clean the wound. Her touch was rougher this time, angry. He flinched, but not from the sting. "I want to make it right," he said, the words sounding hollow. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Make it right? How? Will you bring my brother back from that tree? Will you give me back my father, who died in a St. Louis slum because his heart broke and his faith turned to ash?" She tied the new bandage with a vicious, practiced knot. "You cannot make it right. You can only heal, Mr. Harlow, and then you can leave. Your wound is clean. You don't need to come back." She was dismissing him, not just from the clinic, but from her life, from the very memory of what they had been. "My arm," he said, grasping at an excuse. It twinges. I think I might have pulled it out of the wagon." She looked at his arm, then up at his face. Her eyes narrowed. She knew he was lying. He saw the calculation in her gaze, the weariness. She was trapped. As a doctor, she could not refuse a patient, even one who was inventing symptoms. "Then you may return in 3 days, she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "If it is still bothering you, the fee is $1 for the dressing." "Good day." He put the coin on the table and slowly put his shirt back on. He was a fool to think this could be simple. He had come here looking for a doctor. He had found a judge. He walked out through the waiting room. Mrs. Gable and Jedediah Marsh were gone, replaced by a young mother with a sick baby. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, pulling her child closer. The gossip had already taken root. As Cole stepped onto the boardwalk, he felt the full weight of the town's attention. The whispers were no longer quiet. He heard them from the mercantile, where Mr. Finney was sweeping the steps. He saw them in the way Sheriff Hemlock, the son of the man who had overseen the lynching, watched him from his office window, a smug, knowing look on his face. The talk was everywhere. Doctor, Leighton and the cattle baron, the murderer's sister and the man who let it happen. It was a scandal, rich and dark as molasses. For some, like Hemlock and the old guard, it was proof that she was unfit, a woman of loose morals, stirring up a past best left buried. They called her progressive, liberal, Eastern, all words meant as insults, meant to imply she was not one of them, that her education and her trousers, which they gossiped she wore when riding out to the mining camps, were an affront to decent society. But for others, the town's invisible population, she was something else. As Cole mounted his horse, he saw the young mother with the sick baby scurry into the clinic, her face full of a desperate hope. He'd heard that Clara treated the native women from the small, displaced camp outside of town, that she delivered babies for women the old Doc Ephraim had refused to see, that she charged what people could pay, and sometimes nothing at all. To them, she was not a scandal. She was a necessity, an idol. He rode out of town, the weight of their judgment, their hope, and their hatred, heavy on his shoulders. Clara locked the clinic door at sunset. Her hands ached. She had seen 12 patients, set a broken finger, and launched a boil. And she had felt Cole Harlow's presence in the room long after he'd left. A phantom heat, a lingering smell of leather and dust. She walked the half-mile to her home, the small, stone-walled parsonage at the edge of town where she and Thomas had grown up. It was all her father had left her, besides his broken Bible and a box of medical texts. She had scrubbed it clean of its ghosts. But now, a new one had arrived. She lit a lamp, the parlor flickering to life. It was here, in this room, that she'd received the letter from the Women's Medical College in St. Louis, her acceptance of a small, bright light in the suffocating darkness of her grief. She had fled Larkspur with her father, 2 ghosts on a train heading east. He had found work in a parish, but the fire had gone out of him. He preached of damnation and saw only the rope. She had thrown herself into her studies. She'd descended into the cold, chemical-smelling anatomy labs, her stomach churning, but her resolve hardening. Professor Davies had tried to warn her off. "Medicine is a brutal business, Miss Layton," he'd said, his voice not unkind. "It is no place for a woman's delicate sensibilities." She'd thought of her brother's body, hanging in the dark, and replied, "I have no sensibilities left, sir." She'd proven him wrong. She had the stomach for it. When the border skirmishes flared up, she volunteered at a battlefield clinic. The world dissolved into a nightmare of mud, blood, and the high, thin screams of dying men. She learned to amputate a leg in under 10 minutes, to stitch a chest wound by the guttering light of a lantern, to pack gangrene and pretend the smell wasn't seeping into her skin. She had built a wall around her heart, brick by bloody brick. Then the fever came to St. Louis. It had taken her father in 3 days. He had died in her arms, his body light as a bird's, whispering of a green valley, of his son Thomas, of forgiveness. "Don't let the hate eat you." "Clara," he'd gasped, his eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling. "It ate me." After that, there was only one place to go, back to the town that had taken everything. She had not come for revenge. She had come to reclaim her name, to stand where her brother had fallen, and to exist, in defiance. She was Dr. Layton. She was a physician, and she would not run off. Not by the gossip, and not by the ghost of Cole Harlow, far away, at the Hard H. Cole stood in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The room was a shrine to a legacy he'd never truly wanted. He looked at the portrait on the mantel. Not his father, his brother, Liam. Liam, with his easy smile, his bright eyes. The brother who had wanted only to be Cole. Cole, older by 2 years, had been his father's son. Hard, driven, and desperate for the approval of a man who never gave it. Liam had been their mother's son, soft, artistic, and always in Cole's shadow. The memory rose, sharp and unwelcome. 5 years ago, a celebration in town. Cole had just secured the big government cattle contract. He and Liam were drunk, full of whiskey and pride. "The last one to the gate is a coward," Cole had yelled, spurring his horse into a reckless gallop. Liam, always trying to keep up, had pushed his mare too hard on the rocky pass. The mare stumbled. The sound was sickening. A crack that cut through the night. Not the horse. Liam. His neck snapped instantly. Cole had sat by the body until dawn, the rising sun revealing his brother's peaceful, dead face. His father, Josiah, had not wept. He had stood at the grave, his face like carved granite. "You did this," he'd said, his voice flat, dead. "You always pushed him. You have his blood on your hands. This ranch, it's wasted on you. Get out." Cole had been banished, riding the lines as a common ranch hand for 6 months. Then the stroke had claimed his father. Josiah's last act was to summon Cole. He'd gripped his son's hand, his eyes burning with a desperate, dying fire. "Don't let it fail," he'd rasped. "It's all that matters." Cole had inherited it all: the land, the cattle, the power, and the crushing, suffocating burden of it. He had blamed himself for Liam's death, just as he blamed himself for Thomas Layton's. He was a man defined by the ghosts he had failed to save. And now, the one ghost he had tried to forget was back, looking at him with eyes that saw every sin he had ever committed. A week later, Clara was on the road from the Black Hills mining camp. The ride was long, her buggy rattling over the frozen ruts. She had just delivered a baby, a difficult birth, and she was bone-weary. The sun was a smear of cold orange in the west, and the wind had a bite that promised the first real snow. She was still a mile from the parsonage when a figure stumbled out from a copse of barren cottonwoods, blocking the road. He was drunk, the stench of it hitting her even from 10 yards away. He wore the tattered remnants of a cavalry uniform, his face a mask of dirt and stubble. Eli Slater. His brother had been one of the loudest in the mob, one of the first to throw the rope. Well, Slater slurred, grabbing her horse's bridle. The mare shied, pulling the buggy to a sharp halt. "If it ain't the hangman's sister, Dr. Witch." "Let go of my horse, Mr. Slater," Clara said, her voice steady, her hand moving toward the heavy leather satchel that held more than just medicine. "I am in a hurry." "Oh, in a hurry. Are we?" He leered, his face close to hers. "In a hurry to get back to your fancy house, or maybe to the cattle baron?" He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You think you're better than us? Coming back here, with your fine words and your doctrine. Your brother was a thief, a damn thief. And you—" He raised the half-empty whiskey bottle he was clutching. "You're just a whore. Maybe I'll finish what we started 10 years ago. Finish the Layton name for good." He yanked the bridle, pulling the horse's head down, and raised the bottle to swing. "Slater!" The voice was a roar. A horse thundered up the road, dust flying from its hooves. Cole Harlow. He must have been riding his fence line. He swung off his mount before it had even stopped, his face a mask of pure, cold fury. "Let her go," he commanded. Slater startled, let go of the bridle and turned, a drunken grin spreading across his face. "Harlow, well, now, come to protect the pretty doctor. The whole town's talking about you two. How she's been treating you special." "I said, let her go." Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. Slater, emboldened by the whiskey, swung the bottle at Cole. Cole ducked under the clumsy blow. The sound of his fist connecting with Slater's jaw was a sharp, solid crack. Slater went down in a heap, the bottle shattering on the rocks. But he wasn't done. With a roar, Slater pulled a long skinning knife from his boot and lunged up from the ground, catching Cole on his left forearm. Clara screamed. Cole didn't even look at the wound. The sight of the knife, the threat to Clara, had broken something inside him. All the pent-up rage from Liam's death, from Thomas's lynching, from 10 years of self-hatred, erupted. He roared, a sound that was not human, and tackled Slater. His hands found the man's throat. He slammed Slater's head against the rocky road. Once, twice. "Cole, stop!" Clara was out of the buggy, pulling at his arm. "Stop! You'll kill him! Cole!" Her voice, high and terrified, finally cut through the red mist. He froze, his hands still locked on Slater's throat. The man was limp, a trickle of blood running from his scalp into the dust. Cole looked down at his own arm. His sleeve was soaked. The bandage she had just applied 3 days ago was ruined, a bright, pulsing red. He climbed to his feet, his entire body shaking. The adrenaline vanished, leaving him cold and nauseous. Clara was instantly at his side, all fear replaced by the doctor's focus. She ripped open his sleeve, The stitches had torn, the wound gaping open. "He's alive," she said, glancing at the unconscious Slater. "But you are bleeding, heavily. My house is just up this road. Come on, lean on me." The old parsonage was dark. She lit a lamp, the small parlor swimming in a pool of soft, golden light. It was a simple room, clean, smelling of dried sage and old books. "Sit," she ordered. "Take off your coat." While he fumbled with the buttons, his left arm useless, she went to a cabinet. She returned not just with her medical bag, but with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. She poured 2 stiff measures. "You'll need this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I'll need this." He downed him in one gulp, the liquid fire a welcome shock. She took a smaller sip, her eyes never leaving his arm. "This is going to require stitching. Again." She set to work. She cleaned the wound, her touch different this time. The clinical coldness was gone, replaced by a deep, weary tension. He watched her face in the lamplight, the way it softened the deep lines of grief around her mouth, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the snip of her scissors and the high, thin scream of the wind outside. She finished, her fingers tying the last knot. Her hand, smeared with his blood, lingered on his arm. A single, trembling moment. He could feel the warmth of her skin through the new bandage. He reached with his good hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He didn't touch her face. Not yet. His fingers brushed a strand of dark honey hair that had fallen from its pin, tucking it gently behind her ear. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She just closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for a fraction of a second. It was the smallest surrender, an admission of a decade of loneliness, of a terror she had just felt, of an exhaustion that went bone deep. "Clara," he whispered. The name was a prayer. He leaned in. She met him. It was not the fiery, careless kiss of their youth. It was hesitant, desperate, and drowning in grief. It tasted of whiskey and carbolic and the salt of his own blood. It was a kiss that asked nothing, but confessed everything. "I am still here. I am still broken. I remember. It lasted only a moment, a lifetime." She pulled back, her eyes wide, as if surfacing from deep water. She put a hand to her mouth, a small, trembling gesture. "I can't," she whispered, her voice shattering. "I can't." She stood, turning away from him, her whole body shaking. "I don't know how to forgive you." He looked down at his hands, his right, which had just touched her face, his left, wrapped in a bloody bandage, the hand that had just nearly taken a man's life. The lamplight was kind, but it could not hide the truth. "I know," he said, his voice rough with a truth 10 years old. "I don't know how to forgive myself." She busied herself with cleaning her instruments, her back a rigid, unyielding line. The moment was over, shattered, and in its place, a raw, terrible honesty remained. November settled over Larkspur Bend like a wet wool blanket, heavy and gray, before hardening into a sheet of iron. The wind coming off the Bighorn Mountains lost its bluster and gained a biting, silent edge that froze water in the trough within an hour of sunset. In the month since her return, Dr. Clara Layton had carved a strange, precarious space for herself in the town's ecosystem. To the women of Larkspur, she was a godsend. They came to her with their colicky babies, their female troubles, and their bruised arms hidden under long sleeves, whispering secrets they had never dared tell old Doc Ephraim. She listened, her hands warm and efficient, and she gave them tonics of willow bark and validation. To the children, she was the candy doctor, known for the whorehound drops she kept in a glass jar to soothe a sore throat or a frightened cry. But to the men who gathered around the potbelly stove in the Mercantile, and specifically to Sheriff Hemlock, she was a festering splinter. She walked with her head too high. She spoke with words that were too big. And she was a Layton. Every time she walked down the boardwalk, her skirt sweeping the dust, the older men saw the ghost of the brother they had murdered, and it made them hate her. They spat tobacco juice near her boots, not on them, but close enough to send a message. Clara ignored them. She had built a fortress of routine around her heart. Clinic, rounds, home. Clinic, rounds, home. Up at the hard H, Cole Harlow was dismantling his own fortress, stone by heavy stone. It started on a Tuesday morning, under a sky the color of a bruised plum. Cole stood on the porch of the bunkhouse, his breath plumbing in the frigid air. He watched the hands saddle up for the day's line riding. "Burnett, Hayes, step down!" Cole's voice was a whip crack across the frozen yard. Two men, seasoned hands with faces like tanned leather and eyes that shifted too much, paused. They were good riders, hard workers. They had also been in the front row of the mob 10 years ago, holding the torches high. Cole had kept them on because they were useful, because in the West, utility often outweighed morality. "Something wrong, boss?" Burnett asked, spitting a stream of brown juice into the snow. "Pack your rolls." Cole said, "You're done." The yard went silent. Even the horses seemed to freeze. "Done?" Hayes narrowed his eyes. "Winter's coming. Cole, you can't turn men out now." "What for?" "You know what for," Cole said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've got your pay calculated through the end of the month. Pick it up from Gus. Then ride out. If I see you on Hard H land by sundown, I'll treat you as trespassers." Hayes made a move toward his hip, a reflex, but Gus Riley stepped out from the shadows of the barn, a Winchester cradle casually in his arm. Hayes froze. "You're going soft." "Harlow," Burnett sneered, swinging down from his horse. "That doctor witch has got you gelded." "Ride," Cole said. He watched them go, two dark specks disappearing into the vast, indifferent white of the plains. It didn't fix anything. It didn't bring Thomas back. But the air on the ranch felt cleaner. 2 days later, a wagon from the Hard H rolled up to the small, drafty building that served as the town orphanage. It was run by Mrs. Higgins, a widow with a heart as big as the territory and a purse that was perpetually empty. Cole climbed down, ignoring the ache in his healing shoulder. He signaled Gus and the new boys to unload. They hauled down 4 sides of beef, cured and wrapped in canvas, followed by 3 sacks of flour and a crate of winter apples imported from the south. Mrs. Higgins came out, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes widening. "Mr. Harlow, what is this?" "Winter stores, ma'am," Cole said, tipping his hat. He felt awkward, exposed. He wasn't a man given to charity, he was a man given to commerce. "Thought the children might need it." "Need it?" The woman looked like she might weep. "We were down to cornmeal, mush, and prayers. I don't know what to say. The Lord bless you. Cole Harlow." "Just see they eat." Cole grunted, climbing back onto the wagon before she could try to hug him. News traveled faster than a telegraph in Larkspur Bend. By noon, everyone knew the cattle baron was firing lynch mob men and feeding orphans. The town whispered that he was buying his way into heaven. Or perhaps they whispered with a lewd wink, buying his way into the doctor's bed. The collision came 3 days later. The door to Clara's clinic burst open, letting in a swirl of snow and a groaning man supported by 2 others. It was Gus Riley, Cole's foreman, supporting a man Clara recognized as Tobias Miller, a homesteader who tried to farm a scrap of rocky land near the creek. "Get him on the table," Gus barked, his face pale. Clara dropped the book she was reading and was instantly in motion. "What happened?" "Fence line dispute," Gus muttered, helping lift Miller onto the examination table. Miller was barely conscious, his face a mask of blood. He pulled a knife. I had to subdue him." "Subdue him?" Clara's voice rose as she cut away Miller's shirt. The man's ribs were clearly broken, his face battered purple, and there was a deep gash on his scalp from a pistol whipping. "You nearly killed him! Gus!" "He was cutting the Hard H wire. Ma'am, the boss told us to protect the perimeter." "Get out!" Clara hissed, grabbing a basin of water. "Tell your boss that if this man dies, I will testify against him myself." She worked on Miller for 2 hours, setting the ribs, stitching the scalp, listening to the terrifying rattle in his chest. When he was finally stabilized, sleeping under a heavy dose of laudanum, Clara washed the blood from her hands. She was trembling, Not from fear, but from a white-hot rage that burned through her exhaustion. She threw her coat on and marched out of the clinic. She didn't care about the snow. She didn't care about the stairs. She walked straight to the livery, hired a horse, and rode for the hard H. She found Cole in the corral, breaking a new colt. He was sweating despite the cold, his movements fluid and powerful as he worked the animal. When he saw her ride in, he tied the colt and walked to the fence, wiping his face. He looked hopeful. For a fraction of a second. "Clara," he said. "Tobias Miller is spitting blood in my clinic," she said, staying on her horse, looking down at him. "Your foreman beat him half to death over a coil of wire." Cole's face fell. "Gus told me. Miller pulled a knife. Clara, Gus was defending himself. Gus is twice his size and was armed with a repeater," she shouted, the wind snatching her words. "Miller is a starving farmer trying to keep his sheep from freezing. Is this your legacy? Cole? Beating down the weak? I heard about the orphanage. I heard about beef. Did you think a few sides of meat would wash the blood off your hands?" Cole flinched as if she'd struck him. He gripped the fence rail, his knuckles white. "I fired Burnett and Hayes. I'm trying to clean this place up. I'm trying to change." "You can't buy your way to redemption? Cole!" she cried, her voice cracking. "You think writing a check or firing a few hired guns changes who you are? It changes nothing. You are still the man who owns the land, and the law, and the lives of everyone in this valley." "Then tell me what the hell I can do," Cole roared back, slamming his hand against the post. The colt behind him skittered in fear. "Tell me, I can't bring him back. Clara, I wake up every night seeing Thomas swinging from that tree. I see Liam's neck broken in the rocks. I live in a house full of ghosts. I am trying to do something, anything, to make the scale balance. But you look at me, and all you see is the 20-year-old coward. Tell me what to do, and I will do it." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The snow began to fall harder, dusting Cole's dark hair with white. He looked shattered, his chest heaving, his eyes raw with a desperation she had never seen in him. Clara felt a crack in her own armor. She hated him. She loved him. She didn't know where one ended and the other began. "Stop acting like a king," she said softly, turning her horse, "and start acting like a man." She rode away, leaving him standing in the snow. The tension in Larkspur Bend tightened like a winch with the arrival of the train on Friday. A private car had been attached to the rear of the westbound line. From it stepped Cornelius Thorne, a man who looked like he was made of oil and velvet. He was a railroad baron from Chicago, smelling of expensive cigars and industrial ambition. He didn't come for the scenery. He came to the valley. Thorne set up court in the hotel dining room, buying drinks for the town council. He laid out maps that showed a spur line cutting right through the basin, turning Larkspur Bend into a shipping hub. It meant money. It meant growth. It meant the end of the open range. He summoned Cole to a meeting the next day. Clara heard about it from the postmaster. The whole town was holding its breath. If Cole sold the right-of-way through the hard H, the smaller ranchers would be forced out, their land swallowed by the tracks and the depots. Cole walked into the meeting wearing his work clothes, dust on his boots, looking like a rough-hewn boulder next to Thorne's silk vest. The town council sat around the table, eyes glittering with greed. "It is a generous offer. Mr. Harlow," Thorne said, sliding a paper across the mahogany table. $50,000 for the easement. You keep the grazing rights to the north section. The town prospers. Everyone wins." Cole didn't even look at the paper. He looked at the councilman. He looked at Sheriff Hemlock. "You mean you win," Cole said, his voice a low rumble, "and the council lines their pockets. What about Miller? What about the Croft place? The tracks go right through their water source. Progress requires sacrifice." Thorne smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. "Small operators are inefficient. This land isn't just dirt to be bought and sold by the yard," Cole said, standing up. "It's people's lives. I'm not selling, not an inch. And if you try to lay track on hard H land, I'll tear it up faster than you can put it down." You are standing in the way of the future, Mr. Harlow, Thorne said, his smile vanishing. That is a dangerous place to stand. I've been in dangerous places before, Cole said. He turned and walked out. When Clara heard, she felt a strange fluttering in her chest. He had defended them. He had defended Miller, the man his foreman had beaten. He was fighting. But the real test came in the dark of the moon. It was late, past midnight, when a scratching came at the back door of the clinic. Clara woke from a fitful sleep in her small cot in the back room. She grabbed her father's old Colt revolver. She had learned to be careful, and moved to the door. "Who is it?" "Please, medicine woman." The voice was a whisper. Female, accented. Clara lowered the gun and opened the door. A native woman stood there, wrapped in a tattered trade blanket, shivering violently. In her arms, she held a bundle. It was a boy, no more than 8 years old. His skin was burning, his breath coming in shallow, terrifying rasps. "Pneumonia. He is dying," the woman said, her eyes pleading. "The white medicine man before, he would not see us. He said we bring disease. Bring him in," Clara said instantly. Stepping back, she knew the risk. The town's hatred for the Indians was even deeper than their suspicion of her. If Sheriff Hemlock found out she was harboring a native child in the clinic, he would shut her down. Or worse, they would burn the place. She worked through the night. The boy, whose name was Little Hawk, was critical. His lungs were filled with fluid. She needed to keep the room hot, steamy. She needed mustard for poultices, fresh milk, and more wood. She was running low on everything. She couldn't go to the mercantile. Buying supplies in the middle of the night would raise questions she couldn't answer. By the next afternoon, the sky had turned a terrifying, solid white. A blizzard was coming, a true Wyoming killer. She was trapped. She had a dying boy, a terrified mother hiding in her supply closet, and no wood for the night. She did the only thing she could think of. She wrote a note, sealed it, and paid a street urchin a nickel to run it to the livery stable, to be taken to the hard H. "I need wood. I need milk. I need discretion. Please." See, it was a gamble. If he was the man she thought he was, he might help. If he was the man he used to be, he would ignore it. 2 hours later, the wind was howling like a banshee, driving snow sideways so hard it scoured the paint off the walls. The clinic door opened, fighting the gale. Cole stumbled in, covered in snow, looking like a yeti. He carried a massive armload of firewood and a sack slung over his shoulder. He kicked the door shut, latching it against the storm. "Gus drove the wagon," he gasped, dropping the wood by the stove. "He's taking it back to the ranch. I told him not to wait. The pass is closing." He looked around the clinic. He saw the native woman huddled in the corner. He saw the small, dark form on the bed. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked at Clara, stripping off his heavy buffalo coat. "Is he going to make it?" Cole asked. "I don't know," Clara said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "He needs heat, constant heat." Cole nodded. He went to work. He stoked the fire until the iron belly of the stove glowed cherry red. He unpacked the sack, fresh milk, a jar of honey, dried beef, clean blankets. He didn't ask why she was doing this. He didn't ask about the risk. He simply took the post by the window, watching the street through the slats of the blinds, standing guard. The storm hit with full fury at sunset. The world outside disappeared. There was no town, no ranch, no railroad. There was only the clinic, a tiny island of light in a roaring ocean of white. They worked in tandem. Clara tended the boy, forcing air into his lungs with steam, massaging his chest. Cole kept the fire roaring, heated the water, held the boy down when the fever dreams made him thrash. Around midnight, the crisis broke. Little Hawk coughed, a deep, wet sound, and then took a clear breath. His skin cooled. He slept, a natural, healing sleep. The mother wept silently in the corner, holding her son's hand, before succumbing to her own exhaustion on a pallet of blankets. The clinic was quiet, save for the roar of the wind and the pop of the wood. The air was thick with steam and the smell of wet wool and sage. Clara slumped into the chair by her desk. She felt hollowed out. Cole poured a cup of the milk he'd brought, heated it on the stove, and handed it to her. He sat on the edge of the desk, close to her. "You saved him," Cole said quietly. "We saved him," Clara corrected, staring into the cup. "I couldn't have done it without the wood. Or the guard." She looked up at him, in the dim light of the oil lamp. He looked stripped down. The arrogance was gone. The guilt was there, but it was quieter now. He looked just like a man who had ridden through a blizzard because she had asked him to. "Why did you come?" she asked. "Because you called," he said simply. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. This time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, rough skin against smooth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. For the last 10 years. For the boy I was. For the man I failed to be." Clara stood up. The cup rattled as she set it on the desk. The grief was still there. A vast, underground river. But the dam had broken. She needed to feel life. She needed to feel something other than death and duty. She took his hand and pressed it to her chest, over her beating heart. "Cole," she breathed. He kissed her. I wasn't hesitant this time. It was a collision. It was hunger and desperation, and 10 years of starvation. He lifted her onto the desk, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling the pins free until it tumbled down her back. She gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, needing the weight of him to anchor her to the earth. They moved to the small cot in the back room, the door slightly ajar to keep the heat coming in. The storm raged outside, trying to tear the roof off, but they were oblivious. Their love-making was not gentle. It was a frantic, wordless conversation. It was Clara reclaiming the part of herself she had buried in the anatomy labs and the battlefield tents. It was Cole trying to pour every ounce of his regret and his devotion into her skin. It was shadowed by the ghosts of her brother and his brother, by the knowledge of the town that hated them, by the fragility of the peace they had stolen. But in the friction and the heat, there was a terrible, beautiful release. Later, much later, they lay tangled under the heavy wool blankets. The fire had burned down to low embers. The wind had quieted to a mournful whistle. Clara lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. She traced the long, jagged scar on his shoulder where the bullet had hit him, the scar she had healed. She felt a tear slide down her nose and land on his skin. "You should have fought for me," she whispered into the darkness. The words had been waiting in her throat for a decade. That night, "You should have fought." Cole's arm tightened around her, holding her so close she could barely breathe. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I know," he whispered back, his voice thick with the night. "I'm still fighting." The world returned in shades of pale gray and frozen blue. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the entire territory was holding its breath, buried under 3 feet of clean, unforgiving snow. Inside the clinic, the stove crackled, a small bubble of warmth in the frozen world. Little Hawk was sleeping peacefully, his breath steady, his skin cool. His mother sat beside him, weeping silent tears of gratitude, her hand resting on his chest. Clara felt a weary, hollowed-out satisfaction. Cole stood, stretching the stiffness from his bones. The night had taken its toll. He looked at her, his eyes raw with the intimacy they had shared. A question lingering in the quiet air. "I should go," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Before the town is fully awake?" "Yes," Clara agreed, not looking at him. The heat of their passion had faded, leaving the cold, complicated truth of their situation. She felt his hand on her shoulder, a brief, possessive squeeze. He pulled on his heavy coat, the smell of buffalo hide and man filling the small room. He looked at the native woman and her child, then back at Clara. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, of shared conspiracy, and then he was gone, slipping out the back door into the pre-dawn glow, a ghost disappearing into the snow. Clara busied herself, checking the boy's lungs again, He was clear. It was a miracle. She gave the mother powders and instructions, and an hour after Cole had left, she bundled them in fresh blankets and sent them out the back way, their tracks quickly covered by the morning wind. She scrubbed the clinic, removing every trace of her secret patients, every trace of Cole. But as she went to the mercantile for fresh supplies, the world had already shifted. Mr. Finney, who usually had a kind word for her, was suddenly engrossed in his ledger. He grunted when she asked for carbolic soap and bandages, slamming them on the counter and taking her coin without meeting her eye. Mrs. Gable, who was in the store buying flour, saw Clara, and her face, which had held a grudging respect, tightened into a mask of pure, righteous indignation. She gathered her skirts and moved to the far side of the store, as if Clara were carrying a plague. Clara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. It was worse than before. This was not just suspicion, it was judgment. Her first appointment, Mrs. Croft, never arrived. Her second, a young ranch hand with a festering rope burn, sent a boy to retrieve his deposit. The note, scrawled on a piece of packing paper, said simply, "Am getting help elsewhere." By noon, it was official. She had been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. Someone had seen, in a town this small, a glimpse of Cole Harlow's distinctive buffalo coat leaving the clinic before sunrise was as good as a full confession. The following Sunday was a brutal, clear day. Clara debated staying home, barricading herself in the parsonage. But her father's voice, the one from before the grief broke him, echoed in her memory. "Never let them see you hide from the truth. Clara, your head is high." She put on her best dress, a simple dark wool, and walked to the church. The air was frigid, the snow squeaking under her boots. When she entered the small, packed building, the murmur of conversation died instantly. It was as if she had thrown a stone into a pond of frogs. Every eye was on her. She saw the whispers, the veiled smirks, the cold, accusatory stares of the women. She walked to her family's old pew, alone, and sat, her back straight as a steel rod. The sermon was unbearable. The visiting preacher, a fire and brimstone man named Reverend Pike, seemed to be speaking directly to her. He thundered about the sins of the flesh, about the harlots of Babylon, about women who forgot their place and brought moral rot into the heart of a godly community. After the final amen, the congregation filed out, pointedly giving her a wide berth, a small island of shame in the house of God. She waited, letting them pass, her face a pale, composed mask. Sheriff Hemlock was waiting for her on the church steps, the sun gleaming off his badge. He was a large man, soft in the middle, who ruled the town through a combination of his father's legacy and quiet intimidation. He stood in her path, blocking her way, forcing her to stop. His voice was loud, carrying to the clusters of churchgoers who had deliberately lingered to watch. "Well, Dr. Layton," he said, a smirk playing on his lips, "it seems you've been busy. We are a decent town, a family town. We don't take kindly to your kind of progressive medicine." "Get out of my way, Sheriff," Clara said, her voice low and level. "I heard you had a visitor during the storm," Hemlock continued, his voice rising, feeding off his audience. "The cattle baron himself. Must have been a terrible emergency to keep him there all night. Or perhaps you were just tending his wounds." He laughed, and a few men behind him joined in. "And I hear you've been tending to the savages, too, bringing their filth right into town." The accusation hung in the cold. "Clear air, fornicator, Indian lover. You're accusing me of harboring sin." "Sheriff," Clara said, her voice clear, cutting through the whispers. "You, of all people. You, whose father ran this town on lies and graft. You, who uphold a law that murdered an innocent man." Hemlock's face turned a mottled red. The smirk vanished. "You best watch your mouth, girl," he hissed, stepping closer, his hand dropping to his pistol grip. "My father was a good man. Your brother was a thief. And you're just a whore. Maybe it's time you finished what you started 10 years ago and left." We don't want your kind here." Clara stared at him, her heart hammering. Her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. She looked past him, at the faces of the town. Mrs. Gable, Mr. Finney, the ranchers who had turned their backs. Not one of them met her gaze. They were complicit. They were the mob, all over again, but this time in their Sunday best. She said nothing. She stepped around Hemlock, her shoulder brushing his, and walked away. She did not run. She walked, each step an agony of humiliation, down the main street to the parsonage, the silence of the crowd following her like a physical weight. She locked the door, and then, for the first time in 10 years, she sank to the floor, put her head in her hands, and wept. She wept for her brother, for her father, for the boy Cole had been and for the woman she had become, who had fought so hard for a place that would never, ever be her home. She was done. The fight was over. The hate had finally won. She was packing her father's medical texts into a trunk when a thunderous pounding came at the door. "Clara! Open this door! Clara!" It was Cole. He didn't wait for an answer. The door frame splintered as he put his good shoulder to it, bursting into the room, his face a mask of black fury, his coat still on. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared, seeing the trunk, the bag on the bed. "I am leaving," she said, her voice dead, her eyes red from crying. "I am leaving Larkspur, this time for good." "Like hell you are." He grabbed her arm. "I heard what Hemlock said. I'll kill him. I'll tear this town down to the studs." "And then what?" "Cole," she snapped, ripping her arm from his grasp. "Burn it? Shoot them all? You can't fight a whisper. You can't fight their rotten, self-righteous hearts. They've already convicted me." "Then let me stand with you. Let me tell them. We'll get married. Right now. I'll make them respect you." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Make them? You think your name, the name that watched my brother die, is a shield? It's a target. You standing with me just proves their point. I'm exhausted. Cole, I'm exhausted by fighting the past, and I'm exhausted by fighting the present. I have no fight left. Don't do this, Clara. Don't run again." "I'm not running," she said, turning back to her trunk, her movements sharp, angry. "I am choosing. I chose to come back here to heal people. But this town doesn't want healing. It wants a scapegoat. It wants to stay sick." As she packed, the memory of that night, the real, specific poison of it, rose up, choking her. She remembered her brother, Thomas, in his smithy, his face smudged with soot. Old Man Hemlock had been there, demanding Thomas shoe his prize mare. "I'm busy, Sheriff," Thomas had said, his voice polite but firm. "I have 3 paying jobs to finish by sundown. I can get to her in the morning." "You'll get to her now, boy," Hemlock sneered. "And you'll do it for the privilege of my protection." Thomas, quiet, proud Thomas, had just shaken his head. "My price is my price, Sheriff, and my time is my time. I'll see her in the morning." Hemlock had left, his face purple with rage. The very next day, the money was reported stolen from the land office. A single marked silver dollar was found hidden under Thomas's anvil. A lie. A petty, vindictive lie told by a powerful man who couldn't stand being told no by a blacksmith. A lie that cost Thomas his life. Cole watched her, his fury collapsing into a desperate, helpless grief. He saw the trunk, the finality of it. He saw the woman he had just found, the woman he had held through the storm, slipping through his fingers. He had offered to fight, but she was right. His fists couldn't fix this. But maybe, just maybe, the truth could. He turned without another word and left, slamming the broken door behind him. He didn't ride to the saloon to kill Hemlock. He rode to the town hall. The clerk, a small, mousy man named Abernathy, looked up in terror as the cattle baron stormed in. "I want the town records," Cole demanded. "From 10 years ago. The land office ledgers, the sheriff's reports, everything, now." "But Mr. Harlow, those are archived. Now, Abernathy, for 3 hours." Cole sat in the dusty, freezing archive room, surrounded by piles of rotting paper. He tore through the ledgers, and then he found it. It wasn't just a lie, it was a cover-up. The land office ledger, kept by an agent named Barrow, showed a deficit of nearly $300. But tucked inside the ledger was a folded stack of letters. Frantic, angry letters from Barrow to the territorial governor in Cheyenne. He was complaining about Sheriff Hemlock Sr., accusing him of appropriating funds for his own use, of creative accounting and threats. The dates were a week before Thomas's lynching. Barrow had been transferred, quietly. A month later, Old Man Hemlock had been stealing from the town. He'd been caught. He needed a thief, and fast, and his pride, stung by the blacksmith, had known just the man to frame. Cole held the letters in his hand, his blood running cold. It was all there, the motive, the crime, the proof. He was running from the town hall, the papers clutched in his fist, when he heard it. Not the slow, methodical toll of the church bell, the frantic, panicked ringing of the fire bell. He looked up. Black smoke was pouring into the gray afternoon sky. From the schoolhouse, Clara had finished packing. Her trunk was by the door. She was walking to the livery stable, her steps heavy, her gaze fixed on the muddy, snow-filled street. When the bell started, she heard the shouts. "Fire! School!" And then she heard the scream, a high, terrified sound. "The children!" The teacher, Miss Albright, was in the street, hysterical, her skirt singed. "They're still in there! The stove! It exploded!" Clara dropped her bag. Her exhaustion, her resignation, it all vanished, burned away by a lifetime of duty. She ran. The front of the small, one-room schoolhouse was an inferno. The town was already forming a pathetic bucket brigade from the trough. "How many?" Clara yelled at the teacher. Three! Timothy Gable and the Marsh twins. They were in the cloakroom. They're trapped." Clara didn't hesitate. She saw the back of the building, where the smoke was thick but the flames hadn't yet reached. She grabbed a horse blanket from a nearby wagon, plunged it into the freezing water of the trough, and wrapped it around her head and shoulders. "Don't go in there, Mr. Finney shouted. "It's a tinderbox." She ignored him, running through the deep snow to the back of the building. Cole, arriving on his horse, saw her disappear into the smoke. "Clara!" he roared, leaping from the saddle. He smashed a window with his fist, glass shattering. The cloakroom was full of thick, acrid smoke. She found the children huddled together, coughing, crying, terrified. The Marsh twins, a boy and a girl of 6, were clinging to each other. "Come on," she yelled, her voice muffled by the blanket. She grabbed the 2 twins, pushing them toward the broken window. "Cole, take them!" He was there, his arms reaching in. He pulled the 2 small, coughing bodies out and passed them to the crowd. "One more," Clara gasped, her lungs burning. "Timothy!" She found him, the smallest, hiding under a bench. As she grabbed him, a heavy, burning beam crashed down from the ceiling, blocking the door, blocking her path to the window. The fire roared, a living, hungry thing, cutting her off. "Clara!" Cole's voice was a raw scream of terror. She saw the window, a small square of hope. The flames were licking at her. The heat was unbearable. She had no choice. She shielded Timothy's small body with her own, ran the few steps, and threw him toward the window. "Catch him!" Cole lunged, catching the boy as he flew through the opening. Clara tried to follow, but the fire surged, a dragon's breath, engulfing the window frame. It caught her arm, her hand, the one she was using to push off the sill. The pain was a white-hot, blinding scream. She fell back, her skirt on fire. Cole didn't think. He vaulted through the window, through the very flames, landing on the burning floor. He grabbed her, beating the flames out on her skirt with his bare hands, and hauled her back toward the window. He shoved her through, limp and gasping, into the arms of the waiting townsfolk, and then climbed out himself, his hair and coat smoking. The roof of the schoolhouse collapsed inward with a sound like a cannon shot. Clara was on her knees in the snow, coughing, soot-covered, but she was clutching Timothy Gable. who was weeping into her shoulder. The town stood frozen, silent. Mrs. Gable ran forward, snatching her son, looking at Clara not with hatred, but with a dawning, horrified awe. They all saw it. They saw her run in when they had stood back. They saw her pass the children out, and they saw her left hand and forearm. The sleeve was burned away, the skin beneath a raw, blistering red, the flesh seared. That night, the saloon was silent. The railroad baron, Cornelius Thorne, was in the corner, watching with a predatory stillness. The entire town was crammed inside, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and fear. Cole Harlow stood on a table, his face smudged with soot, his hands raw. Clara sat at a table near the front, her hand and arm thickly bandaged, her face pale, her eyes burning with pain and fever. She had refused whiskey, refused laudanum. She wanted to be present. You all know what happened today. Cole's voice boomed, silencing the room. You saw Dr. Layton, the woman you scorned this morning, walk into a burning building to save your children. He paused, letting the shame settle. But you don't know why you scorned her. You did it because you've been living a lie for 10 years, a lie told by this man's father. He pointed at Sheriff Hemlock, who was standing by the bar, his face uneasy. You called Thomas Layton a thief, Cole said, his voice dropping. Dangerous. You called his sister a whore. Well, this is the truth. He held up the letters. He read them. He read Barrow's accusations. He showed them the land office ledger, the deficit, the dates. Sheriff Hemlock's father was the thief. He stole your money, and he sent an innocent man, a good man, to the gallows to cover his own crime. The saloon exploded. Men surged forward, shouting, their faces, which had been so quick to judge Clara, now turned in righteous fury on the sheriff. And you, Cole roared, pointing at Hemlock. You knew. You've been protecting his name, perpetuating the lie, because it gave you this badge. You let this town crucify this woman, twice, to protect your family's dirty secret. The crowd turned into a mob. They surged toward Hemlock, who fumbled for his gun, but he was too slow. Silas Croft, whose own children had been in that schoolhouse, tore the badge from Hemlock's chest. Get out, Croft snarled, his face inches from the sheriff's. Get out of Larkspur and don't ever come back. Hemlock, his power broken, his face ashen, was shoved out the saloon doors and into the night. Cornelius Thorne, seeing his political ally, his source of leverage, disgraced, quietly slipped out the back. His bid for the valley was over. The town, spent, turned to look at Clara. One by one, Mrs. Gable first, then the Marsh family, then Mr. Finney. They approached her table. They didn't know what to say. They mumbled, "Thank you," and "God bless you, doctor." Their eyes fixed on her bandaged arm. It was not forgiveness. It was gratitude, tinged with a deep, profound shame. Cole took her home. The parsonage door was still broken. He knelt before her, his hands gentle as he checked her bandages. "It's over, Clara," he said, his voice thick with relief. "They see the truth. They see you. Hemlock is gone. The past is finally buried." Clara looked at her ruined hand. The pain was immense, a deep, throbbing fire that felt like it was burning straight to her bone. She had saved the town's children, but she had lost the one thing a surgeon could not spare. "You fixed the past, Cole," she said, her voice weary, distant. "That was for Thomas. That was for your guilt. But this," she held up the bandaged, useless hand. "This is the price for today." He looked up, his triumph fading, a cold dread creeping back in. "They'll respect you now," he said, his voice smaller. "No," she said, pulling her hand back, cradling it. "They're grateful. It's not the same as respect. It's not the same as healing. Healing takes more than a single fire." He had no answer. He had won the battle for her brother's name, but the war for her, for the town, for the future, was far from over. She was staying, for now, but she was no longer his. She was no longer even her own. She was a monument to their sins, and their small, brutal redemption. Winter locked its jaws on Larkspur Bend. The fire at the schoolhouse had burned away the town's rotten foundations, but the rebuilding was a slow, cold, and painful business. The townspeople, led by a shamed Mr. Finney and a grateful Mrs. Gable, had formed a new council, and collections were being taken to rebuild the school. But the social landscape, like the physical one, was a field of blackened timbers and frozen mud. Clara's hand was a testament to that fire. The flames had been merciless, searing deep, cooking the nerves and tendons of her left hand, the hand she had used for the delicate work of surgery. The first week, the pain had been a living, breathing monster, a constant, screaming agony that left her weak and nauseous. Cole had been a fixture at the parsonage, his face a mask of guilt. He had hired a woman from the next county, a quiet widow named Mrs. Shaw, to cook and clean for Clara, to change the dressings when he was not there, but he was almost always there. He would sit with her through the night, his presence a heavy, silent comfort. He learned to change the bandages himself, his large, rough hands surprisingly gentle. He would unwind the gauze, his jaw set, revealing the raw, weeping ruin beneath. He would clean it as she instructed, his touch steady even when she hissed in pain. He would apply the salve, a greasy, herbal-smelling concoction he'd bought from a traveling apothecary, and wrap it again. His movements precise, his focus absolute. He never spoke of the night of the storm. He never spoke of the future. He spoke of the ranch, of the price of beef, of the new schoolhouse plans. He was a man rebuilding a fence, post by steady post, without ever looking at the horizon. Clara's life, her very identity, had been burned away with her hand. She was no longer a surgeon. She was a physician who could not hold a scalpel, who could not suture a wound, who could not deliver a baby with the confidence her training had given her. She had to learn to do everything with her right hand, and the simple tasks, buttoning her dress, writing a prescription, even stirring her tea, were a daily, humiliating reminder of her loss. Cole saw this. He knew his words were useless. So, he acted. "The clinic is too small," he announced one morning, standing in the parsonage doorway, the cold air rushing in. "It's drafty, and the back room is no place for a woman to sleep." "It's what I have." "Cole," she said, her voice flat. She was staring at her bandaged hand, which rested on the table like a sleeping, wounded animal. "No, it's not." The next day, a wagon load of fresh lumber from the Hard H sawmill arrived in front of the clinic. Cole, Gus, and two other ranch hands, men who had once looked at Clara with suspicion, descended on the small building. They didn't ask permission. They simply began to build. Cole worked with a silent, furious energy. He tore down the rotting back wall, which had been scorched by the schoolhouse fire, and began to frame a new, larger addition. He was building 2 rooms, a proper insulated bedroom, and a larger examination room with a new, larger stove and a row of shelves for her medicines. The town watched. They saw the cattle baron, the wealthiest man in the territory, hammering nails in the freezing cold, his breath pluming, his face set in concentration. They saw him building a shrine to the woman who had saved their children. It was a public penance and a public declaration. Clara, trapped in the parsonage, felt a confusing mix of gratitude and resentment. He was fixing her life, but he was also sealing her obligation to him. Her first test as a one-handed doctor came not from the town, but from him, a rancher from the high country. Silas Croft rode hard into town, his face gray with panic. His son, 8 years old, was sick. A raging fever, a cough that sounded like a dry, barking seal. "It's the croup, doctor," Silas pleaded, standing on her porch, twisting his hat in his hands. "Old Doc Ephraim. He never knew what to do. The boy, he's turning blue." "I can't ride." "Silas," Clara said, holding up her bandaged arm. "I can't. I know. Cole's here. He said you'd know. He sent a buggy. Please, ma'am." Cole. He had anticipated this. He had orchestrated it. The buggy ride was a cold, jarring misery. Cole drove the horses hard, his face set. When they arrived at the small, windswept homestead, the sound was terrifying. The boy was suffocating. Clara walked into the bedroom. The air was dry and stale. "Cole," she snapped, her voice pure command. "Tell Silas to boil every kettle he owns. I want this room filled with steam. Now!" She turned to the boy. He was frantic, his eyes wide, his small chest heaving, that horrible rasping sound tearing from his throat. She couldn't use her stethoscope and hold him. She couldn't prepare a poultice. "Hold him up," she ordered Cole. "Sit on the bed, hold him against your chest, upright. It will help him breathe." Cole, his face pale, did as he was told, gathering the small, feverish body against his own. The boy's father brought in the first steaming kettle. "I need ipecac syrup," she said, looking at the mother. "Do you have any?" The woman shook her head, weeping. "My bag," Clara said, turning to Cole. "In the buggy, a small brown bottle, marked—" While he was gone, she used her good hand to mix a mustard plaster, her movement slow, clumsy, agonizing. When Cole returned, she had him hold the boy still while she applied it to his chest. For an hour, they fought. Cole held the child, his large body a fortress of warmth, while Clara forced spoonfuls of ipecac and hot, honeyed water into his mouth, and the room filled with a thick, tropical steam. Suddenly, the boy gave a great, retching cough. He vomited, a thick plug of mucus dislodging from his throat, and then he took a deep, shuddering, clear breath. The barking was gone. He was just crying, a normal, healthy cry. Clara sank onto a stool, her good hand shaking. Cole laid the exhausted, sleeping child back on the pillow, his own shirt soaked with sweat and sickness. He looked at Clara. He didn't speak, but his eyes were full of a raw, profound awe. On the ride back, the silence was different. It was not empty. It was full. The tension between them began to return, but it was not the desperate, grieving passion of the storm. It was slower, deeper. He would come to the parsonage at night, after working on the clinic expansion, his hands raw and splintered. He would sit by the fire while she read, and she would find herself watching him. One night, she put down her book and looked at his hands. "You'll get an infection," she said, her voice soft. "It's just wood," he said. "Let me—" She brought her basin. With her good right hand, she carefully, slowly, washed the grime from his hands. She found a deep splinter in his palm and, with a wince, used her tweezers to pull it free. He hissed, but didn't move. She felt his eyes on her as she worked. When she was done, her hand lingered on his. She traced the long, faded scar on his arm, the one Slater's knife had left. Then, she traced the newer one, the bullet wound she'd cut and stitched. "You have too many of these," she whispered. He turned his hand over, his fingers gently finding her bandaged one. He lifted it. He did not kiss her. He pressed his lips to the thick gauze, a kiss of pure reverence, a silent apology. He kissed her hand, her ruined, useless hand. A tear escaped her eye and fell onto his wrist. He held her hand there for a long time, the two of them bound by the scars they had given each other. The thaw came in early March, not as a gentle promise, but as a violent breaking. A warm Chinook wind swept down from the mountains, and the world began to melt. The 3 feet of snow that covered the valley turned to slush, then to water. The creek swelled. The ground, still frozen solid 2 feet down, could not absorb the runoff. And then the rain started, a cold, hard, driving rain that lasted for 2 days. Larkspur Bend became a muddy swamp, but up on the high plains, where Cole kept his main herd, it was a catastrophe. The canyons and arroyos, dry for months, became raging, muddy rivers, a herd of 500 head trapped against a high ridge by the floodwaters. Scattered, the ground turned into a sucking mire, and a sudden cold snap turned the rain to ice. Cole rode in at dawn, his face grim, his horse lathered. "We lost a third of the herd," he told Gus, who was overseeing the final roof planks on the clinic. "And the High Canyon line riders, they're trapped. Johnson, Ames, and the new kid, Billy." How bad? Gus asked. Bad. The South Pass is a river of ice. The North is a mudslide. They're in the line shack, but they've been there 2 days. They'll be low on wood, and Billy, he's just a boy. I'll get a crew, Gus said. I'm coming with you, Clara said. She was standing on the porch of the clinic, her new clinic, which was almost finished. Cole turned, his face hardening. No, Clara, this isn't a fever. This is ice and flash floods. It's too dangerous. I can't. You can't. What? Protect me? She held up her bandaged hand. This is useless for surgery. Cole, but my brain is not. Those men will have frostbite. They may have injuries. You are a cattleman. You know how to rope a steer. I know how to save a life. I'm going. She didn't wait for his permission. She went into the clinic and began packing her bag. Laudanum, carbolic, scalpels she prayed she wouldn't need, and a small, sharp bone saw. She met him at the stable 10 minutes later, dressed in a pair of her father's old trousers and a heavy mackinaw. She looked small, determined, and terrifying. Cole looked at her, at the set of her jaw, and knew he had lost. Gus, find her the surest-footed mule we have. The ride was a special kind of hell. It took them 6 hours to cover 10 miles. The world was a treacherous landscape of gray ice and brown, sucking mud. Horses fell, men cursed, and the cold was a physical weight, pressing the air from their lungs. They found the line shack just as the sun was setting, a smear of bloody orange in the west. It was half buried in a new snowdrift, a thin, pathetic line of smoke rising from the chimney. They burst in. The cold inside was almost as bad as the cold outside. 2 men, Johnson and Ames, were huddled under every blanket they owned, their faces stubbled and gray. Boss, Johnson croaked, relief washing over his face. Where's Billy? Cole demanded. He fell. Boss. 2 days ago, trying to save a calf. His leg, it's bad. Clara pushed past Cole. The boy, no more than 18, was in the corner, his face pale as the snow, his lips blue. His left leg was propped on a saddle, swollen to twice its normal size. The trouser leg cut away. It was set at a grotesque, unnatural angle. He's freezing, Doc, Ames whispered, his teeth chattering. We tried to keep him warm, but Clara knelt, her good hand going to the boy's neck. His pulse was a thin, thready whisper. His leg is broken, she said, her voice sharp. All business. And he has severe frostbite in his feet. Cole, get a fire roaring. A real one. I don't care what you burn. Gus, get those blankets on him. Johnson, melt snow. I need hot water. The men, who had looked at her with a mix of awe and terror, snapped to attention. She was a general on a battlefield. She opened her bag. She looked at the boy's leg. The bone was clearly snapped, and the swelling was massive. Ames, she said to the younger rancher, I need you. Your hands are the smallest. I need you to be my left hand. Ma'am, I am going to set this boy's leg, but I cannot do it alone. I am going to tell you exactly what to do. You will do it. You will not faint. You will not question me. Do you understand? The man nodded, his face pale, but his eyes firm. For the next hour, the tiny, freezing cabin became an operating theater. Clara, with her one good hand, directed a clumsy, terrified ranch hand in the delicate, brutal work of medicine. Hold the laudanum to his lips, she ordered Cole. Gus, hold his shoulders. He will scream. Now, Ames, take the foot. Pull, slowly. That's it. A steady, firm pull. Keep pulling until I tell you to stop. I have to get the bone in place. She worked with her right hand, her fingers probing the swollen, cold flesh, feeling for the break, her face a mask of pure, painful concentration. The boy, half conscious, roared as she manipulated the bone. Now, Ames, hold it right there. Do not move. She grabbed the splints and bandages. Cole, hold the leg. Ames, wrap, tightly, just as I showed you. Around, again, tighter. When it was done, the leg was set. The boy was breathing. Clara turned her attention to his feet, which were a waxy, dead white. "This is the hard part," she said, her voice soft. She had the men warm the water, not too hot, and she began the agonizing, slow process of rubbing the boy's feet, bringing the blood back, fighting the frost that had crept into his cells. She saved his leg, and she saved his feet. By midnight, the boy was sleeping. His color returned, his breathing even. The cabin was quiet, save for the howling of the storm. The ranch hands, Johnson, Ames, Gus, were looking at Clara as if she were a new and strange species. She had not wept. She had not faltered. She had taken command, and she had saved their friend. Cole looked at her, his heart so full he felt it might burst from his chest. The respect in the room was a tangible thing. She had earned it, not with a fire, but with her mind and her will. The storm raged for another full day. They were trapped. They ate dried beef, drank hot, bitter coffee, and tended the boy. That night, the second night, the bunkhouse was cramped. The men took turns sleeping. Clara sat by the stove, exhausted, cradling her bandaged hand, which was throbbing from the cold and the exertion. Cole sat beside her. The other men were asleep, their breathing a low, rhythmic sound. "I've never seen anything like that," he whispered into the darkness. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice weary. "You're a miracle, Clara." She shook her head, staring at the red glow of the stove. "No, I'm just a woman with one good hand." He was quiet for a long time. The wind whistled, rattling the small window pane. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him. "That night, Thomas's night, I told you I was a coward, but I didn't tell you the whole truth." She turned, her eyes finding him in the dim light. "I didn't just freeze," he said, his voice thick with a shame that was 10 years old. "It wasn't just the mob I was afraid of. It was my father. It was Hemlock. It was the town council." He laughed, a bitter, self-hating sound. "I had just been made junior foreman. My father, he finally looked at me like I was worth something. I wanted that approval. Clara, I wanted to be one of them, the men with power. And when I saw you, when I heard you scream my name, I knew Thomas was innocent. I knew it was a lie." He paused, the confession hanging in the air. "But I looked at Hemlock, and I looked at the other men, the ranchers, the ones my father respected, and I chose them. I chose their approval. I chose my ambition. I looked away because I was afraid of losing my place, not just my life, my place. I let them kill your brother, for a pat on the head from my father. This was the last ghost. This was the final, ugly, petty truth. It was not a moment of fear. It was a choice." Clara felt the tears, hot and sudden, spill over. She had thought she was done crying, but this was a new, deeper wound. This was the betrayal she had always suspected but had never let herself believe. She began to weep, not loudly, a silent, shaking breakdown, her body collapsing in on itself. She didn't forgive him. She couldn't, but she reached out, her good hand fumbling in the dark, and she found him. She gripped it. She held onto it as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was, once again, breaking apart. She held it, and she wept, and he sat there, accepting her tears, his own face wet in the firelight. A week later, she was back in the parsonage. Her new clinic was finished, but she hadn't moved in. She sat by the window, staring at her bandaged hand. The storm had passed. Billy, the young rancher, was recovering. The town was grateful, but she felt empty. Her hand was a symbol of all she had lost. A soft knock came at her door. It was the native woman, Little Hawk's mother. Her name was Running Fawn. She carried a small, leather-wrapped bundle. "I heard," the woman said, her English soft. "I heard of your hand." Clara nodded, letting her in. Running Fawn unwrapped the bundle. It contained a dark, pungent, root-based poultice. "My people have used this for burns for many winters. It will take the fire out. It will ease the scars." Clara looked at her ruined hand. "It won't make it work again. I am broken." Running Fawn looked at Clara, her dark eyes ancient and kind. She placed her own hand, weathered and strong, over Clara's bandaged one. "The tree that was struck by lightning is not broken," the woman said softly. "It has changed. It grows new branches. The scar is where the strength enters. You do not have to be whole to be worthy of love. Doctor Woman, you just have to be—" She left the poultice on the table. Clara sat, the woman's words echoing in the quiet room. That night, Cole came. He did not knock. The door was still broken from his last fit of rage. He carried a plate of food from the hotel. "You haven't eaten," he said. It wasn't a question. He put the plate on the table. He looked exhausted. He looked at her, at the trunk in the corner, still unpacked. "Are you still leaving?" he asked. Clara looked at him. She looked at her hand. She thought of the woman's words. She was not whole, but she was, perhaps, worthy. "No," she said. "I'm not leaving." He visibly sagged, the tension leaving him in a great rush. He sat in the chair opposite her. They ate in silence. When they were done, he didn't leave. The fire was dying. The room was cold. "I'm tired. Cole," she said. "I know." He stood and banked the fire. He took the heavy blanket from her cot. He lay down on the hard floor near the hearth, his back to her, a silent guardian. Clara watched him for a long time. This man, full of violence and guilt and a desperate, clumsy love. This man who had confessed the worst part of himself and had not run. "Cole," she said. He turned his head. "The floor is cold," she said. "You'll be useless tomorrow." He stood, uncertain. She moved over on her small bed, making room. He hesitated, then lay down on top of the covers, his back to her. A respectful, rigid line. The silence stretched. "Stop being a fool," she whispered, her voice rough. She pulled the blanket up, covering them both. He turned, slowly, to face her. They lay in the darkness, two survivors in a lifeboat. The storm finally passed. There was no passion, no desperation. He put his good arm around her, and she rested her head on his chest, her bandaged hand lying between them. She felt his lips brush the top of her hair. It was not a kiss of desire, it was a kiss of arrival. And for the first time in 10 years, they both slept, finding a small, warm, and profoundly scarred shelter in each other. Cornelius Thorne was a man who did not understand the word no. He understood leverage, and he understood force. Having lost his political pawn in Sheriff Hemlock, he had returned to Chicago not in defeat, but to rearm. He came back to Larkspur Bend not on the passenger train, but on a private charter carrying 20 men who wore derby hats and long, dark coats, and whose eyes were as flat and cold as the steel of the rails they represented. They were hired guns, Pinkertons or some similar private army, men who saw the West not as a home, but as an obstacle to be cleared. Thorne didn't set up in the hotel. He and his men made a grim, orderly camp at the mouth of the valley, a mile from town. He sent a single, typed letter to Cole Harlow at the Hard H and a copy to the new town council. The terms were simple. Cole would sell the easement for the original price. The town would formally approve the right-of-way. They had until noon the following day. If they did not comply, his men were authorized by the railroad's federal charter to clear all obstructions and begin laying track. The letter was a declaration of war. Panic seized Larkspur Bend. This was not a drunken ex-soldier or a corrupt sheriff. This was a corporation. This was the East, with its endless money and its pitiless armies. But the town that Thorne had returned to was not the one he had left. The fire, the confession, and the long, hard winter had forged something new. Clara Layton, her left hand now a puckered, red and white scar, stepped into the void. She was no longer just a doctor. She was the town's conscience. She walked into the hastily convened meeting in the half-rebuilt schoolhouse. The men were shouting, divided, terrified. "He'll kill us all." "Mister," Finney wailed. "We should take the money," another said. Clara slammed her good right hand on the teacher's desk. The room fell silent. He is counting on us to be afraid, she said, her voice clear and carrying. He is counting on us to be divided. He thinks he is fighting Cole Harlow. He needs to find out he is fighting all of us. She turned to the women. Mrs. Gable, Mrs. Croft, you remember the fire. You remember what it is to be unprepared. We will not be unprepared again. She did not organize a defense. She organized a field hospital. She was a general preparing for casualties. Gather the women, she commanded. I want every clean sheet in this town torn into bandages. I want every kettle to boil. I want the church pews cleared and blankets laid down. We will turn the house of God into a house of healing. If Mr. Thorne wants a war, he will have to look his wounded in the face, and so will we. The women, who had once scorned her, now obeyed her without question. Her scarred hand, which she held not in shame but as a badge of office, was a symbol of what they were fighting for, while Clara prepared to mend. Cole prepared to fight. He rode from the Hard H not as a baron, but as a neighbor. He rode to Silas Croft's homestead, to the Marsh Ranch, to the small, muddy farm of Tobias Miller, the man his foreman had nearly beaten to death. He found Miller trying to restring a barbed wire fence. Cole, Miller said, nodding, his face wary. Thorne's back, Cole said, not dismounting. He's bringing an army. Heard, it's your land he wants. Harlow, not mine. You think he'll stop at my fence line? Cole asked, his voice low. He wants the valley. He wants the water. If he builds that spur line, he dams the creek and turns your farm to dust inside a year. He thinks we're just a bunch of ignorant sodbusters he can roll over. He thinks we'll cut and run. Miller stared at him. He saw a man he had feared, then hated. He now saw a man who looked just as desperate and just as rooted as he was. I've got a wife and 2 sons. Harlow, Miller said quietly. So do I. Cole said, he didn't. Not yet. But in his heart, he did. I'm not asking you to fight for the Hard H. I'm asking you to fight for your sons, for the water, for this valley. Miller slowly wrapped the wire around the post. I'll get my rifle. At noon the next day, the wind was high and thin, kicking up dust from the half-frozen ground. Cornelius Thorne and his 20 men, mounted on fresh horses, rode to the narrow pass that marked the edge of Cole's land. They looked like a line of black undertakers. They found the pass blocked. Cole Harlow was there, on his big bay, his Winchester resting on his saddle. Beside him was Gus Riley, but they were not alone, fanned out on either side. In the rocks and behind the wagons were 40 men, ranchers, farmers, the town blacksmith, Mr. Finney from the Mercantile. They were armed with hunting rifles, old cavalry carbines, and shotguns. They were a ragged, desperate-looking army, and they were utterly silent. Thorne reined in, his face a mask of aristocratic disgust. "Mr. Harlow!" he shouted, his voice carrying on the wind. "A final courtesy. You are obstructing the progress of the United States Railroad. Stand aside, or you and your farmhands will be removed by force." "This isn't a collection of farmhands." "Thorne!" Cole shouted back. "This is a town. This is our home. You are not welcome here. Turn your men around and ride out. You are making a fatal miscalculation. Harlow!" "No," Cole said, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "You are." Thorne looked at the line of men. He saw their faces, set and grim. This was not the rabble he had been expecting. This was going to be bloody and expensive, but he had come too far. He gave a curt, almost invisible nod to the man beside him. "Clear the pass," Thorne ordered. A single shot rang out from the railroad line. A warning, but it was answered by a blast from a shotgun from the rocks. Tobias Miller. The air exploded. It was not a battle. It was a brawl. Thorne's men were professionals, firing in measured volleys. But they were firing at shadows. The ranchers and townsfolk were fighting for their homes. They knew every rock, every dip in the ground. Cole was in the center of it, his voice roaring commands, his rifle bucking against his shoulder. He was not the Baron. Aloof and cold, he was a man protecting his kin. He saw one of Thorne's men, a sharpshooter, climbing a rocky outcrop, trying to get a high position to fire down on the farmers. "Gus, cover me!" Cole roared, spurring his horse from behind the wagon. He galloped across the open ground, a clear target. Bullets sang past him, kicking up dust. He heard one rip through the thick canvas of his coat, a hot, searing line of pain across his left arm. The same arm. He winced, nearly losing his grip, but he didn't stop. He raised his rifle, one-handed, and fired at the man on the rocks. The man yelped, grabbed his shoulder, and fell back, out of the fight. The skirmish lasted 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The valley was filled with smoke and the screams of men. The ranchers were not breaking. They were holding. Silas Croft went down, a bullet in his leg, but his son dragged him behind a wagon and kept firing. Thorne, his face pale, watched 2 of his paid men fall dead, and a third clutch his chest. He was a businessman. He was calculating the cost. This was not a simple clearing. This was a war he would have to explain to his board of directors, a war against an entire, unified territory. He raised his hand. "Pull back! Retreat!" His men, surprised but relieved, gathered their wounded, retrieved one of their dead, and pulled back, galloping away down the valley, leaving Thorne alone, surrounded by the smoke and the silence. He stared at Cole, his eyes full of a new, cold hatred. "This is not over. Harlow," he spat. "It is for today," Cole said, his rifle still trained on the man's heart. "Get off our land." Thorne turned his horse and rode away, a solitary, defeated figure. The silence that descended was heavy, broken by the groans of the wounded. Clara, who had been waiting with her buggy on the edge of town, heard the fighting stop and whipped her mule forward, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She arrived at a scene of carnage. Men were bleeding in the dust. She saw Silas Croft and ran to him, her bag open. "Pressure," she commanded Mrs. Gable, who had come with her. "Here, hold it, tight." She was the doctor, all ice and command, her one good hand moving with ferocious speed. She saved Croft's leg from a shattered artery, packing the wound, her face a mask of concentration. Then, through the smoke, she saw him. Cole was leaning against his horse, his face pale, his left arm hanging limp, his coat sleeve a dark, wet red. The ice in her shattered. The world dissolved. She forgot the other wounded. She forgot the town. She saw only him, the vision of her brother, of her father, of every man she had ever lost, rising up in a wave of pure, undiluted terror. "Cole!" she screamed, a sound that was not a word, but a plea. She ran, stumbling over the uneven ground, her bag forgotten. "No," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "No, not you. You can't be. Please." He looked up, startled, his pain-filled eyes widening at the raw panic on her face. "Clara, I'm all right. It's a graze. It hit the old scar." She didn't hear him. She crashed into his chest, her good hand fumbling, pressing against his heart, needing to feel it beat. It was there, strong, steady, thumping against her palm. The relief was so total it buckled her knees. She sagged against him, burying her face in his dusty, powder-burned coat, her body shaking with a violent, racking sob. "I can't lose you again," she wept, her voice muffled, broken. I cannot go through that again." He was stunned for a moment. Then his good arm, his right arm, came around her, holding her tight. His wounded arm, clumsy and bleeding, came up to hold the back of her head. He pressed her face into his shoulder, holding her as if he could absorb her fear. "Then don't," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion and pain. He held her there, in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by the wounded and the watching, respectful eyes of the men he had led. "Don't. I'm not going anywhere. Clara," he bent his head, his lips finding her hair. "I love you. God help me. I have never stopped loving you." She pulled back, just enough to look at him, her face smeared with dust and tears, her eyes raw. "I love you, too," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you, Cole Harlow." It was not a memory. It was not a ghost. It was a confession, spoken aloud in the sunlight, amid the blood and the dust. And it was real. Time passed. The brutal winter and the violent spring gave way to a summer of slow, quiet healing. The railroad did not return. The valley was theirs. Cole Harlow was not a baron. He was a builder. He had given a large tract of the Hard H's best land, the land along the creek, to the town. He was building a new house. Not the dark, fortress-like ranch house of his father, but a simple, strong home of river stone and fresh-cut pine. It sat in a meadow, a mile from town, close enough to be a neighbor, far enough for peace. The house had a wide, sunny porch and a separate wing with its own door. This was Clara's new clinic. It was bright, clean, and filled with shelves. Her scarred hand, she had discovered, was not useless. It was a constant, aching reminder, but she had learned to use it as a brace, a guide. Her right hand had become impossibly, preternaturally skilled. She could mix medicines, deliver babies, and set bones with a one-handed efficiency that awed her patients. Running Fawn's poultice had worked. The scars were clean, not angry, and the pain had receded to a dull throb. It was late afternoon in September. The valley was bathed in the gold light of harvest. Clara sat on the new porch, her scarred hand resting on the arm of a wooden rocking chair. She was not alone. 3 children were at her feet. Timothy Gable, one of the Marsh twins, and little Hawk, who now came to town without fear. She was reading to them from a worn copy of Treasure Island, her voice calm and steady. She heard the sound of a horse and looked up. Cole was riding in, dusty from a long day checking his herds, which were now fat and peaceful. He dismounted, his movements slower, more deliberate than the angry, restless man he had been. He looked at the scene on the porch, the woman, the children, the house he had built, and the deep lines of grief around his eyes softened. He walked up the steps, pulling a clumsy bunch of purple wildflowers from behind his back. The children, seeing him, giggled and scattered, running down to the creek to skip stones. Clara stood, taking the flowers with her good hand, her mouth tilting in a soft smile. He leaned against the porch rail beside her, looking out at the green, peaceful valley. The new schoolhouse was visible in the distance, a small, proud, white building. He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, his voice just for her. "Still fighting?" She turned to him, her gaze clear. The ghosts were gone. She reached out, her good hand touching his cheek, her scarred one resting on his arm, on the old wound. "So am I." She smiled. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, grieving kiss of the storm, or the trembling confession of the battlefield. It was a long, slow kiss of arrival, a kiss that promised not passion, but patience, a kiss that tasted like sunlight and dust, and the promise of a quiet, shared life, built from the ashes, chosen, again. The view pulled back, away from the 2 scarred, hopeful souls on the porch. It drifted over the meadow, where the children played by the clear running stream. It pulled back further, over the rebuilt town of Larkspur Bend, peaceful in the golden light. It rose, higher and higher, over the vast, green, and healing valley, a land that had been bought not with money or with blood, but with honesty, and a love that had, against all odds, endured. Thank you so much for listening to this story from Wild West. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Cole and Clara. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please feel free to leave a comment in English and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Your feedback means everything to us. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel.